Now, Africa's contribution to global trade remains below 3%, with merchandise trade indicating that African nations trade more with countries outside the continent. The Economic Commission for Africa report on regional integration highlights slow progress. The Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa has mixed results, with advances in roads and ICT, but minimal progress in rail and energy infrastructure due to financing challenges. So, Stephen Karingi, ECA Director, cited challenges like unconstitutional changes in government, unemployment in some areas, and poverty. The report notes minimal returns from the African Continental Free Trade Area, with intra-African trade decreasing from 14.5% to 13.7%. Africa now faces a significant infrastructure financing gap, estimated at between $130 and $170 billion annually, prompting exploration of innovative financial mechanisms. At this time, Clive Matibela Smith, a senior executive partner, eCare Capital and Partners, joins me to unpack this. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
So, how have recent shifts in global trade policy impacted the landscape of business operations in Africa? Let's start from there.
What is very interesting from the report, it cites some seriously disturbing statistics that show that decline of trade for South Africa, for example, for Nigeria, these countries that are the conglomerates of the African continent, in itself, its operations have declined. So what you look at there, if you look at port activity, for example, that has gone down quite significantly by about 54.7%. If you look at, for example, the number of goods in trade between the African countries, that has also decreased, as you've seen there, to 13.7%. So what does that mean? It means that we're trading less and less amongst ourselves, despite the fact that we're in an intra-Africa trade policy. And yet the foreign exports have continued, or imports have continued to increase, meaning that we are trading more with the world than we are trading with ourselves.
So now you've talked about how abysmal e-commerce vanguards in Africa have performed in recent times. But then while Africa faces numerous challenges related to tariffs and even trade barriers imposed by other countries, has it also been able to leverage on its own trade agreements, probably regional initiatives, to navigate those challenges and probably facilitate trade within the continent?
You know, as you're speaking about it, my brother, it sounds very romantic. It sounds like something that can be done, you know, within the spark. That's exactly what we've been trying to do. Unfortunately, industrialization has a number of spectrums that need to be focused upon for it to be successful. For example, I'm not going to go far. I'm going to go back here to South Africa. Look what's happened with South Africa and the rest of the world in terms of what we've done with the agreements that we have, for example, in the BRICS with China, Russia, and India. That BRICS consortium, obviously, its focus is more on doing more trade, which we're importing more than we are exporting. We are still focused on our resources, which is our commodities resources, which are still being taken out of the country without fully having the beneficiation that is required for them to create more value. So we don't have enough manufacturing, we don't have enough beneficiation, and so therefore it makes it difficult for us to actually do anything else from the raw products. And they're still leaving the shores and coming back to us in a piece of jewelry or in a piece of material that we then purchase back. So that's the first challenge. If you look at a country like Nigeria, if you look at countries like Cote d'Ivoire, they are supposed to be surpassing by providing the resources of trade that are going internationally. For example, what's happening with the cocoa industry, what's happening with the tea industry, what's happening with our rice industry. All these agricultural products are still mainly going out as raw as they are. So to create value and to build momentum for us to trade more aggressively, we have to look at regulation, yes, but most importantly, we must look at having fully furnished products that we can be able to trade.
Well, it's quite interesting that we're discussing this, Clive, because we know that Africa possesses a wealth of resources and a growing manufacturing base. We even have the AfCFTA agreement. We have other regional agreements. So we have manpower and policy resource, but then we've not been able to fully utilize these resources. So what strategies can be implemented to improve its share in the global export and import markets?
Very important question. So the regional conductivity that has been taking place, for example, you have in SADC, you have further up North Africa, you have the West, and those relationships are also very sensitive, one must say, because we know what's going on with the latest coming out of the western side of Africa. The East trade mark, for example, that's also very key to Africa's growth. But that hasn't seen enough of an influence. There are countries individually, I must say, that are doing much better. You know, the likes of Kenya, the likes of Rwanda are doing a little bit better. They're starting to learn that you need to create a very good, strong value chain in order to attract better yields when it comes to trade. But the core factor of all economic 101, if you want to put it that way, is to make sure that you are developing manufacturing, industrialization. Industrialization does three things that are very core from a continental perspective, but also from a country individually. One, it creates jobs. We've got the highest number of young people on this continent. They all are going to require jobs. They're all required to be active in the economy so that we can make a significant contribution. Two, we need to increase industrialization, meaning that we need more ports of entry so that we can be able to make it easier for us to trade amongst each other. That is why we love the story that is happening between Botswana and Zambia. The bridge that's been connecting those two particular countries to make trade much easier. We need easier ways of making trade as well on the continent, and the agreements that you're talking about, like the SADC region, like the Africa Intra-Trader Agreement, all those are very important to it. But there's no point having it on paper and not literally acting it out and making sure that you create that trade partnership on the continent as an intra-continental effort. That still needs to happen. And then the last bit that, you know, if you increase industrialization, if you increase capacity, if you build more ports, what that will enable us to do is to have ease of reference. Remember, we are still being hit hard by the policies of Europe, policies of China, policies of the United States or the West, as it were. But if we created a more subsequent, or rather a more synchronized effort on the continent, we can then gel much better. And these contracts that we have are the beginning of that. But it needs to be working. We need to implement what is in the policies so that we can see better growth, better stability, better economic activity, and a creation of jobs on the continent.
Clive, earlier on you talked about some exportable products that Africa has in abundance. But then even as we talk about industrialization, we probably may need to also look at the need for diversification, probably beyond primary commodities. And some people are asking the questions if that can be a key driver in achieving this goal.
I mean, it's obvious. I mean, you look at the likes of Singapore, where there is absolutely nothing to no resources, but the country just grew in 10 years to the size that is unbelievable. And there's many other examples. I mean, you look at places like Dubai, for example, you look at the Middle East, how it's developed so quickly over a short period of time. And the secret has always been to create a platform for trade to be made easier. So people are simply going to Dubai, for example, to do business, to make business, because it's an attractive place to be. So we need to understand as Africa that we do have that potential and nothing is stopping us. By the way, we are the powerhouse of trade. If you remember, if you go back in history, you look at the history of the Egyptians and what they did during that time, the most amazing rulership at that point in time, the pharaohs being able to spread trade all over India, all over the European countries. So we have the capacity. If you think about the kingdom of Ethiopia, for example, the trade we had at that point was the best that as the world had ever seen. They'd never seen such incredible ways of doing trade on this continent. This is the history of Africa I'm talking about. So there's nothing stopping us from being able to be strategically positioned to take advantage of the trade market and to increase capacity internally for us to be able to make sure that business stays in Africa. Those commodities must benefit the people of Africa. And at the moment, although we're not colonized, we are behaving like a colonized continent that continues to export its goods without really getting the benefit of enriching its country and its people.
So in terms of increasing capacity, let's look at the supply chain. According to what we know, building supply chain resilience is crucial for African businesses to compete effectively in the international market. So if we are going to concretize the steps, what do you think they should be in terms of taking these steps and ensuring that efficient logistics, diversification of export markets, and the mitigation of risks associated with disruptions in global supply chains are eliminated?
One of the first things that I would start with is security. That's very, very key. We need to be sure that there's not going to be any pirates that stop ships from getting to our shores, so that trade can be easier, trade can be safe. The second thing I would also note what's happening, for example, in South Africa, in Durban, one of the biggest port managers in the continent, Transnet, is struggling right now to get goods out of the country. It's struggling right now to do trade with other countries. People have to wait. In December this year, we had things that couldn't come into the country because the ports are not efficient. And you can see a similar trend if you go around the continent and see what the state of our ports. That needs to be changed. That needs to be elevated. That needs to be put right. The infrastructure has to allow for us to be able to handle capacity. If you've been to Hong Kong, I'm sure you have. If you look at those cranes as you're about to land, you look at them covering the entire seashore there to show that they are serious about trade. If you go to the US, you find the same. If you go to Europe, if you go to Turkey, you see the same. We need to be the same. And I know there are ports that are very capable on this continent, particularly in Nigeria, which is the closest that we have to Europe and to the United States. These are places where I would think we should be focusing on and enhancing and engaging, so that even the goods that don't have to necessarily come through sea can be shipped across intercontinentally. So we are creating problems for ourselves because we're not managing what we have well. And so that has decreased our efficiency to be able to penetrate markets easier. And so therefore that needs to be rectified. And maybe, I don't know, I'm not saying it's the only solution, but maybe privatizing and removing government from managing some of these pots of trade, that might just help us to get out of the pit hole that we find ourselves in.
And that's why it's always said that government needs not to have anything to do with business, but then create that enabling environment for the private sector to thrive. Maybe that would help. Clive Ramatibela Smith, Senior Executive Partner, Hicare Capital and Partners. It was nice talking to you. Thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you.